So, a few weeks ago, I started telling you the story of Joseph from way back in the Old Testament. If you missed it and want to be able to hear it, you'll be able to find it on Facebook or YouTube. Here's the recap. Abraham was Joseph's great-grandpa, and Joseph was part of a big family. He had 11 brothers and one sister, but Joseph was his father Jacob's favourite child. Things didn't go so well for Joseph. His brothers didn't like that he was the favourite or that he knew it, and they ended up selling him as a slave. Having been transported far away from his home in Canaan, we left Joseph working as a slave for a man named Potiphar in Egypt. Now you may remember that Potiphar was quite an important man. He was the captain of Pharaoh's guard. That's the soldiers who were in charge of keeping safe Pharaoh, who was the king of Egypt. And that's where we left Joseph last time, as a slave in Potiphar's house. And the Bible tells us that God was with Joseph and that he worked hard and was well rewarded by Potiphar, and that Joseph worked his way up through his household. Potiphar saw that God was with Joseph, and he put Joseph in charge of his entire house, over everything that he had. And you know what? God then blessed Potiphar's house because of Joseph, and everything went well, and Potiphar ended up leaving everything to Joseph to sort out. Can you imagine that? After all the problems he had, after being sold as a slave, Joseph still put his trust in God, and everything seemed to be working out okay for him. Now Joseph was doing well, he was trusting in God and was being rewarded for it. He had grown up since leaving home and was a good person, and he was a pretty handsome guy as well. And someone started to take notice of Joseph. A certain lady looked at Joseph and she liked what she saw. Now maybe Joseph might not have minded receiving a bit of attention, except the lady that was paying him all the attention was married to his boss Potiphar. Not a good place for Joseph to be in. Here he was, working hard, having earned the trust of Potiphar, and none other than Potiphar's wife had taken a liking to him. And she didn't leave it there. She started to ask Joseph to come and lie down with her. Now Joseph knew this was wrong, and when she kept on asking her, he said to her, "Look, Potiphar has given everything in this house to me to look after, and there's nothing in this house that is forbidden to me apart from you, because you are his wife. So how could I do this terrible thing and sin against God?" Now I told you that Joseph was a good guy, didn't I? He didn't want to do something so terrible against his boss, but more than that, he knew that it would also be wrong in God's eyes. Although he had been given so much, Joseph knew that to be selfish and do things with Potiphar's wife wouldn't just hurt Potiphar, it would hurt God. And to Joseph, not hurting God was more important than his own feelings and more important than the feelings of Potiphar and his wife. Wow. Joseph had made his stand, and that was good. But one day, as he was going about his work, he went into the house, and he didn't realise that there was no one else in the house except Potiphar's wife. She grabbed hold of him and asked him again to come and lie down with her. Joseph pulled away and left the house, but Potiphar's wife had torn off part of his clothes, and then she started to scream. She shouted, "Help! Help!" And she called out until all the other servants came running. And when they came, she waved the clothes at them and said, See what has happened? This Hebrew slave is mocking us. He came in to lie with me and I screamed. And when I screamed, he left his clothes behind and ran away. And when Potiphar came home, she repeated the story to him. But it was all a lie just to get Joseph in trouble. So Potiphar took Joseph and put him into prison. His wife had made up stories about all the bad things Joseph had done, and Potiphar had to believe his wife. So Joseph found himself in a bad spot again, cast into prison with all the people who had done wrong against Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. You know, this year, as we've been in lockdown, maybe it's felt a bit like prison to us. We couldn't go out when we wanted to, we couldn't see our friends, life wasn't the same. But at least we got to share our time with our family. At least we could go out for walks and had hope that it wouldn't be for too long. But for Joseph, he had no idea what would happen, how long he would be in prison, whether he would ever see his family again. So what do you think happened to Joseph in prison? Do you think he just sat in a cell and felt sorry for himself? Not at all. Joseph still trusted in God, and God was still watching out for Joseph. Again, we read that because of his love for God and his trust in God, Joseph was well looked after. The warden of the prison saw how Joseph wasn't like all the other prisoners who were there because they were real criminals, and he put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners. Can you imagine that? Yet again, Joseph was rewarded and looked after, despite everything seeming so bleak. Do you remember the promise in the Bible that I told you about when we looked at the first part of Joseph's story? That all things work together for good for those who love God. Well, this verse certainly seems to fit well with Joseph's life. Whatever life had to throw at him, he trusted in God, and everything seemed to work out okay. Now, I told you that Joseph was in the prison where Pharaoh sent his prisoners. And in prison, Joseph found himself with some interesting cellmates. And there were two quite important people that Pharaoh was angry with. One was his chief butler. The other was his head baker. Both of them were thrown into the prison where Joseph was, and Joseph was charged with looking after them and making sure they were safe in the prison. One night, both of them had strange dreams, and when Joseph came in to check on them in the morning, they were both really sad, and he asked what was wrong. They told him that they had each had a strange dream, but there was no one to tell them what they meant. Joseph told them that God knows all things, and they should tell him their dreams, and he would ask God what they meant. The chief butler told his dream to Joseph first and said, I was dreaming, and there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. And as I watched, the branch budded, and flowers came out, and then great big bunches of nice juicy grapes. And I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Joseph asked God what the dream meant, and God told him. He said to the butler, this is what your dream means. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days' time, Pharaoh will lift up your head, and you will be put back in your place as butler, and you will give Pharaoh his cup as before. But when this happens, remember me, and show me kindness, and mention me to Pharaoh, so that I might be free from prison as well. Well, you can imagine the butler was probably pleased to hear this. Now the chief baker was listening, and when he heard the great news Joseph had given the butler, he was really keen to tell Joseph his dream too. He said, in my dream, I had 3 baskets on top of my head, and in the top basket there was all kinds of bread and cakes and pastries, but the birds flew down and ate all the good things. Now Joseph asked God what the dream meant, and God told him. He said to the baker, this is what your dream means. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days' time, Pharaoh will lift up your head and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will peck at you. Wow! What a horrible meaning for the baker's dream. I imagine that he didn't sleep very well for the next 3 days. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Now, I don't know what you dream about when you're asleep. I don't often remember any dreams I have. When I do remember my dreams, they don't make a lot of sense. As I mentioned last time I talked about Joseph, my wife often has dreams which seem very real to her. But the 2 dreams in today's story were special. God gave the butler and baker those dreams and gave Joseph the meaning of the dreams to tell to them both. That doesn't mean that every dream is a message from God. That's just how God spoke in that moment to give a message to Joseph for those 2 men. So 3 days later, it was Pharaoh's birthday, and he made a great feast for all his servants. And he brought his head butler and his chief baker out of the prison before everyone. And he restored his head butler to his position, and he waited on Pharaoh, and he gave Pharaoh his cup again. But he had his chief baker hanged, just as Joseph had said. Everything Joseph had told them came true. Bad news for the baker, good news for the butler. But the butler didn't say anything to Pharaoh about Joseph, and before long the butler forgot all about him. So that's where we're going to leave Joseph for now, still in prison, still trusting God. In spite of everything that had happened, Joseph continued to have faith in God no matter what. Faith isn't wishful thinking, it's a solid thing, the knowledge that God never fails. We read in the Bible, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So if God doesn't normally use dreams to speak to us, how do we hear from God? Well, we have the Bible, which has been given to us to help us know about God and what his plan is for us. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, we can learn all about how God guided his chosen people. We've heard in recent months about Noah and Abraham. We've heard a little about Jacob and a bit more about Joseph. We also get to read in the Old Testament all about Jesus. There's many prophecies that talked about his coming hundreds of years before he was born, and also the prophecies that he would die. And in the New Testament, we have the realization of all those prophecies. Jesus, truly God and truly human, how he was born, how he lived on the earth, how he healed people, performed miracles, and told everyone about God's love for them. And Jesus did come to die and to pay the price for all the wrong things we would ever think and say and do. And then he rose from the dead and has gone back to heaven. Each of us has the same choice to do as Joseph did, to put our faith and trust in God no matter what has happened to us. We get to choose to believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and to follow him. What will you do? Thank you for listening.